The Squier Classic Vibe has always been a guitar that's interested me. It's a Squier, but it's a vintage style guitar that's under $500. So now that I have my hands on one, is it any good? We're gonna cover today. Before we really dive into the feel though, I'm just going to cover all the tones that we have here. For the review, I'm playing through a Fender Mustang LT25. That's not my amp, so you can't really compare it to any of my other videos, but also a great beginner amp for anyone looking. So here we go, neck, tones on 10. Neck middle. Middle. Middle bridge. And bridge. So there you have basically all the tones. I prefer the tones a little bit rolled back on all my Strats, but on this not as far as some other Strats. I prefer this around like a 7 and an 8 maybe, volume where it is, and I'll play the neck middle position and I'll compare it to the one I just did, back to back. There you have the tones, and let's just get right into the pickups, because you heard how they sound, and it's pretty good. Like I said, a lot of that is to do with the amp too. I have it set pretty much like I normally would use an amp, but the pickup, I gotta say, the pickups do sound better than I thought they were gonna sound. Yeah, the title Squier, I feel like it messes with you, low price tag, you just assume it's not gonna be as good. But these pickups, Alnico pickups, they're pretty good. Now they're not custom shop pickups, obviously, but for most people, especially if you're only gonna pay $500 for a guitar, it really does not matter. Like, you can still get that gorgeous Strat tone. So, pickups, they are great. There's room for improvement. If you had this guitar and you're making upgrades slowly over time, you could do the pickups, but that's not the first thing I would do. What is the first thing I would do? I would replace a lot of the electronics. So, first off, just the feel of the pots. I think they could use a little bit less friction, but again, you go in there, it's a quick change out, or I'm sure you can somehow lube it up. I haven't really looked into that ever, but it's a minor thing too. It's not really affecting much unless you play with the tone knobs a ton when you're playing. So that's something to think about. The electronics, like I said, the capacitors and the potentiometers, not amazing. Then you have the 5-way tone switch, which obviously, I like a 5-way. I like a 3-way better because it's more vintage accurate, but you wouldn't expect that on this kind of a guitar. But it's kind of cheap. Like that's actually probably the first thing I would replace, because That's really the only thing that when using this guitar, being with it a lot, that's the only thing that I'm like, Other than that, it's a great guitar. It feels very good to play. Like, I honestly have no complaints about the way it feels. The neck carve, I don't think it's really 50s accurate. It's just a very generic C shape, but that feels good, I think. It's not too bulky. You wouldn't want a very vintage accurate guitar at this price point, because I don't think people would buy it. So I think you have to make it a little bit modernized. You have to, like, the 5-way switch, you wouldn't put on a 3-way switch. You have to make it appeal to more masses. So the neck carve, zero complaints here. Could it be rolled over? Yes. You could roll over the fretboard edges to make it nicer to play, but you don't expect that when you're buying a guitar for less money. That's just something that comes at the higher end, but it doesn't feel bad. Like, it's not rolled, but it's not like it's really jabbing into your hands to play. Doesn't really affect the feel too much. Obviously you do feel it, but I think the best way to put it is, unless you have a guitar with those things right next to you, or you're very used to playing them, I don't even think you'd notice. So it's not bad per se. It's just not as good as it could be. You have the medium tall frets, which a lot of people I think like. They make bends pretty easy. Doesn't take a lot of pressure to fret out a note or to intonate. There's no hiccups, you don't catch them as you're moving. It's pretty smooth. The frets, they're not that rough. I was expecting them to be like rough when you're playing and like you'd need to sand them down, but they feel pretty good. Bending feels nice. Like I said about the modernization before, you do have a 9.5-inch radius, where a vintage guitar is 7 1/4, but a lot of people, especially beginner, I don't think would like a 7 1/4. So this 9.5 is it's kind of a compromise. It's not like a Gibson, but it's also not like a vintage Fender. It's a little bit in the middle, closer to Gibson, obviously. It just feels great. I love the nice maple neck. You can definitely hear the profile of the maple neck come through in the playing. I haven't compared this to the Classic Vibe Rosewood, but I'm pretty sure that I can hear it. It just sounds great. It has a great tone. You expect a vintage instrument to, say vintage and have some vintage things on it and looks, but I was not expecting the sound to actually be less modern and more vintagey with the pickup selection and everything. It sounds really good. I don't know how many, I'm sure I've said that like 10 million times. Feels good, sounds good, but it does. And then another thing that I really like about what they did is you have this color. It's like a stain almost, I'm not sure. The finish makes it a little yellowier, a little browner. Makes it look aged, whereas normally this wood, maple, would be just a lighter color, closer to white almost. Whereas this is pretty yellow, you got the skunk stripe. It just really looks vintage, and I very much like that. Because you're gonna buy a vintage guitar, you want it to have vintagey things. And you see that as well, the maple on the fretboard, which is finished. I think you'd expect that, but you have a finished maple fretboard that's not finished. Tuning, I've noticed a little bit of an issue with the B&E string, whereas I think the string tree might be locking the string up a little bit, so sometimes when I was tuning the guitar, like I would turn the tuning peg and you wouldn't hear it until all of a sudden it would be too far. Which no big deal, except if you were playing, you did a massive bend and it caught, then you'd be out of tune. That's like a Gibson style issue. Gibson's not with a string tree, they bind in the nut, but it's still a binding problem. That could just be this guitar too, don't know. But that's not a big issue. I haven't felt that when I was playing, just when I was tuning it up. Tuners, they're good tuners, standard. I think like a vintage Squier tuner, the Clouson style. Very, just cool overall. I think it's all metal too, no plastic, no cheapness to it. Now let's listen to some gain. We've heard the pickup's pretty clean-ish. Now let's do a little bit of gain. mean, just an overall great guitar. I mean, have a couple little complaints. So the electronics, sure, could be upgraded, could roll over these edges. But, I mean, I don't know. I like it. I think, honestly, if you're gonna get a guitar, if you're looking, you like vintage Strats, like you like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, the classics, Clapton. I think if that's what you're going for and you're on a budget, honestly, I can't think of a better guitar than this. I've recommended them before on a budget, and now even more so will I recommend them. I think they are great entry-level guitars. With that, well,